Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to a completely different video. This is one of the reasons why the Raiders suck. This is coming from a Raider fan since 1985. This is about the Oakland, Los Angeles, Oakland, Las Vegas Raiders and why we seem to be cursed since 2003. I am wearing this cap to actually prove that, you know, the Raiders did win Super Bowls in the olden days. You may have to tell your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren that this was actually a thing. The Oakland, Los Angeles, Oakland, Las Vegas Raiders used to actually win games. Now obviously we're only 3 games into the 2025 season, coming off a just disgusting loss to the Washington Commanders. We haven't beaten a Washington team since 2005. Granted, we don't play them very often because obviously they're in the NFC. I do apologise to my subscribers who usually watch videos about films. This is obviously not about films. This is about why the Raiders suck and continue to suck. Again, this is coming from a place of love. I've been a Raider fan since 1985. But it's rough because the same mistakes keep getting made. It's the fact that it's so predictable when we lose. Any Raider fan who thought we were going to go into Washington, our second East Coast game in 3 weeks, coming off a late Monday night game, travelling cross country, and we were going to win that game. There's no way we were going to win that game. And the nail in the coffin was when they announced Jaden Daniels, the Commanders' wonderful starting quarterback, wasn't going to play. Because if you're a Raider fan, you know our record against backup quarterbacks is absolutely atrocious. Teams, if they want to guarantee a win, should just play their backup quarterback, because we make everybody look like a Hall of Famer when they're a backup. I mean, there's other reasons why the Raiders suck, but in this episode, it might end up being a series. We're going to look at the draft. And, you know, Raider fans are like, you know, when we win, we're going to the playoffs, and when we lose, fire everybody. But there has to be some explanation and medium and of why we're just never going to win anything. And one of the reasons is the draft. Our roster is pretty bad. Let's be honest, and our roster has been pretty bad for a long time. We have been rubbish from 21 out of the last 23 years. Even though the 2021 team that made the playoffs was like the luckiest playoff team in history. I think we were something stupid like 6-1 in games decided on the last play of the game. That's sustainable. And all the people who said, oh yeah, we made the playoffs that year as a wild card and almost beat the Bengals, who went to the Super Bowl. We didn't almost beat the Bengals. We almost tied the Bengals at the end of the game, even though Derek Carr never threw the ball in the end zone. So this idea that we almost beat the Bengals in the playoffs in 2021 is a load of nonsense. But since the Super Bowl loss in 2002, again, I don't want to hear anybody talking crap about Rich Gannon and his 5 interceptions. The Buccaneers knew exactly what we were doing. He's lucky he didn't throw 10 interceptions. You know, if we'd played anybody in the NFC in that Super Bowl, we would have won, and we would have won comfortably in 2002. But we played John Gruden, who was our coach from 1998 to 2001. And that's where the curse, I think, has started. Obviously, the Lions have got the curse of Bobby Lane, the Boston Red Sox in baseball, not the NFL. Obviously, the curse of the Bambino, which took about 100 years to actually dispel. You know, the Bears are cursed with never having a great quarterback since Sid Luckman in the 40s. And I think the Raiders are cursed ever since Al Davis traded John Gruden to the Bucks for draft picks and $8 million. Granted, $8 million to Al Davis was a lot of money, because the Davis family, up until recently, because they moved to Vegas, is like one of the poorest ownership families in the NFL. But from the 2003 draft onwards, you know, the draft is supposed to be where you build your franchise and you pepper in free agents to get you over the top. But the Raiders draft cupboard has been so empty for decades. You know, Al Davis used to be the smartest guy in the room, but for the last years of his life, he wasn't. The game moved on. I mean, we can get into why the Raiders didn't change with the times. The West Coast offense has a lot to blame. You know, Raiders teams were built on bump and run defense. They were built on rushing the passer without really blitzing. You could put more guys in coverage. It was built on running the ball and taking deep shots. And once the West Coast offense came in, it just changed the game completely. You know, running crossing patterns and quick pass plays. You know, you can't get a lot of pass rush when it's 1, 2, 3 and the ball's out. Plus, crossing patterns are pretty hard to defend when you're playing man-to-man. And Al Davis never really changed. It was always man coverage, 4-man rush. Plus, as far as drafting, obviously Al loved these measurables, but sometimes measurables don't actually tell you whether somebody can play football properly or not. You have to remember Cliff Branch, who all Raider fans should adore, and the NFL screwed him over by waiting until he was dead before he got in the Hall of Fame, just like Ken Stabler. They don't get me started in the Hall of Fame. You know, Cliff Branch allegedly couldn't catch a cold when he started his Raider career, and every year he would tear his hamstring in camp, and so he could be stashed on the roster until he could actually catch the ball. He turned into a Hall of Famer, which he can't do anymore. But Al Davis got into the habit of obviously going after measurables in the draft, but also drafting players who reminded him of other players. So how many white defensive ends did we draft after Howie Long retired in 93? So many white defensive ends with high motors that reminded Al Davis of Howie Long, but weren't Howie Long. I mean, Howie Long's a Hall of Famer. It doesn't get enough credit for helping Greg Townsend get a lot of sacks and Sean Jones get a lot of sacks, amongst others. So obviously Scott Davis, somebody that we'll get onto in the 2003 draft, all these white defensive ends that Al hoped would turn into Howie Long. Fast receivers who can't catch but they're fast. That goes back to Jesse Hester and Dokie Williams, who were both not very good, but they could run fast in a straight line. We'll get to some of them as well. Corners that would remind them of old man Willie Brown, but were never as good as Willie Brown, strangely enough. This is going to be a rant, so this is going to be long. So again, if you're looking for films, this isn't the place right now. I'm sure nobody will actually watch this anyway, but never mind. So let's go back to 2003. The Raiders had just been humiliated in the Super Bowl But the future was bright, just been in the Super Bowl. Again, John Gruden, the head coach, has been traded for 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and $8 million. So Al did Al things. The first round of the draft, he drafted Nnamdi Asomugha, who would turn into an elite cornerback, but in his 3rd and 4th year, so there weren't many early returns. Famously, the commissioner couldn't get his name right when he called his name in the draft and called him Asomugha Nnamdi. Strangely enough, he was probably a round too high, but it turned out alright eventually. He would leave in free agent to Philadelphia and be one of the biggest free agent busts in history, because Philadelphia asked him to play zone and Nnamdi was just completely lost in zone. He's apparently got a nice little acting career now. But then the 2nd round pick, this goes back to trying to find Howie Long, and Al picked Tyler Brayton from Colorado, a white defensive end with an incredible motor, who was absolutely terrible, basically, and a complete wasted pick. And 3 picks later, we could have had Peanut Tillman, a really good corner who mastered punching the ball out and causing forced fumbles. But no, we took Tyler Brayton. I remember when we drafted him, I was not happy. I'm drinking pure ethanol for this video. The rest of the draft, we had 10 picks in the 2003 draft, and we got Justin Fargas, who was a nice little running back for a few years, but nothing special. Son of Antonio Huggy Bear. And Doug Gabriel, the wide receiver. Again, we specialised in drafting receivers who would show flashes, couldn't really run full route trees, and would be out of the league in like 3 years or less. So really, from the 2003 draft, you've got 2 first-round picks. You've got to hit on them. And we hit on Nnamdi, but it didn't take until like year 3 for the switch to go to on. And that's pretty much all we got. Then 2004, we had 9 picks. We had the 2nd pick because we were so bad. That was pretty much the team turned on Bill Callahan for possibly throwing the Super Bowl and changing the offense completely in 2003, despite the fact in 2002 it was pretty much unstoppable. Instead of like tweaking it, they changed it completely, which was a disaster. But in the first round, you get the 2nd overall pick. You know, you got a chance to get a generational player, starter, 10, 12 years. And we took Robert Gallery, the tackle out of Iowa, who was pretty much a bust. I mean, eventually he turned into a solid guard. But you don't take a tackle in the first round, number 2 overall, to develop into a solid guard in your offensive line. That's another thing, one of the reasons the Raiders suck. We just can't develop players. In the last 20 odd years since that Super Bowl, we cannot develop players. So many players go on to have solid careers with other teams. Now, to be fair to Al Davis, everybody would have picked Robert Gallery early. He was deemed to be a stud, a 10-year starter. There was tape with the draft of him like driving defensive players off the field and into the bench area. He was like a can't-miss prospect. But as we know, the draft is a complete crapshoot, and Gallery just never turned into what everybody thought he would be. So to be fair, lots of teams would have picked Robert Gallery. If we hadn't at 2, he would have been gone in the top 5. But the next pick was Larry Fitzgerald, the soon-to-be Hall of Fame receiver for the Cardinals. And Hall of Fame receivers is a recurring theme of the players we could have drafted. But one pick later, Larry Fitzgerald. Pure class. None of the diva aspect that you get with receivers just about 99% of the time. But we picked Robert Gallery instead. But as I said, most teams would have picked Robert Gallery in the top 5. The rest of the draft, we'll get Jake Grove, who was a solid centre for a little while, and Stuart Schweigert, who was a fan favourite safety, but he was pretty bad. And that's all we got from the 2004 draft. Remember, the draft is where you build your foundation by getting these players that you hope to give a second contract to, a third contract, and build your team with. So that's two first round picks in 2003, first round pick in 2004, and we got an excellent corner 3 years into his career, and then he left for Philly, a complete wash at a defensive end, and a solid guard with Robert Gallery. 2005 was even more amusing. 2005 with 7 draft picks. First round we picked Fabian Washington, a fast corner who never panned out because he was basically a fast corner, but he had stiff hips, no ball skills. And the pick next was Aaron Rodgers. Now, obviously he played behind Favre for a few years in Green Bay before he got his start. He was not ready to start right away, so if we drafted him and thrown him right in, it probably wouldn't have worked, and he wouldn't have become Aaron Rodgers until he inevitably went to another team and became a Hall of Famer. But let's just pretend that Aaron Rodgers would have been ready. So in back-to-back drafts, we could have had Hall of Famer Larry Fitzgerald and Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. So we could have had a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame receiver. Instead, we got Robert Gallery, who turned out to be a solid guard, and Fabian Washington, who was not very good. The rest of the draft, we got another corner in the second round, Stanford Routt, who was very grabby, drew lots of penalties in his first few years before he developed into a decent corner. We did have a nice tandem with Routt and Asamoah for probably about a year and a half before Asamoah left, and then Routt would eventually leave as well. The third round we got Andrew Walter, the quarterback. Yeah, we don't draft quarterbacks well either. But to be fair, he was part of the 2006 disaster that we'd get to. But in the third round, the best pick of the draft was Kirk Morrison, the linebacker who now is part of the Raider broadcast team. We all love Kirk Morrison. I've got a Kirk Morrison jersey. Again, good solid linebacker, not a great linebacker, but a wonderful servant of the club. So that was 2005. 2006, which was one of the worst years in Raider history. We went 4-1 in the pre-season, and then 2-14 in the games that actually counted. Art Shell was back, and he should have never come back. We brought Tom Walsh, the offensive coordinator, who was running a bed and breakfast, and he was running the same offense that we had in 94 and 95, no, sorry, maybe 93, 94. And our quarterbacks, Aaron Brooks, we'll get to the Why the Raiders Suck, the free agency episode in the future if I'm still annoyed, which I no doubt will be after we lose to Caleb Williams and the Bears next week. Yeah, so 2006 we had 7 draft picks. Wasn't a great draft, wasn't a great first round to be fair as far as talent's concerned. But in the first round we took Michael Huff, the safety out of Texas. And again, Al Davis loves his secondary players, and probably Michael Huff reminded him of Van McElroy or George Atkinson or somebody. But Michael Huff, he was okay for his career, nothing special, didn't really make any plays, but he was just kind of there. But again, to be fair, the first round in 2006 wasn't great. So the next pick was Dante Whitner, also a safety, who had success with the Bills and the 49ers, certainly a much better player than Michael Huff. So we could have Dante Whitner. So technically we could have had Charles Peanut Tillman, Larry Fitzgerald, Aaron Rodgers and Dante Whitner. And I'm going to guess that the Raiders would have been better with those draft picks. Then the rest of the draft, in the second round we get linebacker Thomas Howard, who's a good player. He's no longer with us, as in he's dead, not on the team. And in the sixth round we get Kevin Booth, who was a decent, okay backup tackle. So you're kind of seeing these drafts are not successful drafts. I mean, obviously you can pinpoint other teams and their poor drafts, but for the Raiders we've made bad drafts a specialty, overreaching for players, etc. And then comes 2007. If you're a Raider fan, you know what 2007 means in the draft. We had 11 picks. So 11 picks in the draft is on the high side, but you have a real opportunity to fix past mistakes, draft players, you know, that are really going to help your team. In the first round we picked Jamarcus Russell, one of the greatest busts in NFL history at quarterback. If Ryan Leaf had never been born, Jamarcus Russell was probably the biggest bust in NFL history. We're talking Pandora Peaks size busts. Kirk Morrison, who I mentioned earlier, tells great Jamarcus Russell stories. You know, Jamarcus Russell held out for a bigger contract after the draft. He was just really interested in the money, he didn't want to play really. So he missed the rookie show. So every year, it's an idea I don't really like because I wouldn't want to do it, but the rookies have to perform for the rest of the team at the front of the meeting room. Jamarcus Russell wasn't part of the rookie show, so he had to do it when he came in after signing his big contract. And his performance was basically taking out a bunch of money and throwing it in the air. And of course, the whole team jumping on it for free cash. And the other wonderful story was that the offensive coordinator gave Jamarcus Russell a DVD to watch of the plays, you know, what sort of plays he wanted to run in the upcoming game, you know, what he liked. So he came back in and told the staff, you know, oh yeah, I like all of them, you know, they're all good. And then it turns out the disc was blank. He had never watched it. Yeah, was never interested in actually playing football, had no passion for football, just wanted the money and being the number one pick. Now, saying that, because of his huge arm, other teams would have drafted Jamarcus Russell in the top 10. So very much like Robert Gallery, let's not make this, oh yeah, the Raiders were idiots for drafting Robert Gallery, the Raiders were idiots for drafting Jamarcus Russell. Other teams would have drafted Robert Gallery and Jamarcus Russell in the top 10. It's not as if they would have went undrafted or something like that. So to be fair to Al Davis, in those two cases, they would have went in the top 10, the top 5 regardless, okay? But the pick right after Jamarcus Russell at number 2 by Detroit was Megatron, Calvin Johnson, who is a Hall of Fame receiver. So again, let's recap. We could have had Charles Tillman, Larry Fitzgerald, Aaron Rodgers, Dante Whitner, and Calvin Johnson. So we could have had Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers throwing to Hall of Fame receivers Calvin Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald. Now, whether we would be able to pay them all their second contracts, but we'd have got them for their first contracts. So let's go to 2008. I told you this was going to be a long video, okay? But the rest of the 2007 draft wasn't actually terrible. The second round we get Zach Miller, the tight end, who was a Pro Bowler for us. Again, because the Raiders have always had a history of really good tight ends, really good punters, really good corners every now and again. Third round, Johnny Lee Higgins, again another wide receiver, kick returner, who's really good for a couple of years and then disappears from the NFL. Michael Bush in the fourth round, a really nice power back. He'd broken his leg at college, so that's why he slipped to the fourth round. That's a really nice pick. The fifth round, Jay Richardson, a defensive end that nobody will remember, but again, another guy who bounced around the league, had a decent career, just not for the Raiders. So 2008, we only had 5 picks in 2008. First round pick was Darren McFadden at running back. I love McFadden, but he was always injured. He never really fulfilled his promise. You know, other running backs that were taken after him, Jonathan Stewart had a really solid career. Chris Johnson, who had a much better career than Darren McFadden. But Darren McFadden wasn't a terrible pick. He just was never as good as he was in college. The rest of the draft in the fourth round, we got Tyvon Branch. It was a good little safety for a few years. Trevor Scott in the sixth round, again, another white defensive end that Al thought of how long. He squinted his eyes and thought he could see how long. And in the seventh round, where you're not really expecting much, we get Chaz Shillings, who again was a decent number 2 or 3 receiver for us for a couple of years. So not an awful draft in 2008. But again, we could have Charles Tillman, Aaron Rodgers, Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson, Dante Whitner and Chris Johnson. I think we're going to win some games with that team. That's like a Madden team that you pick players from other teams. 2009 was a particularly bad one. With 7 picks. In the first round, I think it's 7 overall or 9th overall, we picked Darius Hayward-Bay at wide receiver. Now, poor Darius Hayward-Bay, he was such a good kid, but he was way overdrafted again. Another guy who was fast, could run fast in a straight line. His hands were questionable, to say the least. In the olden days, he would have been stashed in the roster until he could catch. I think he had 14 catches his first year before he was shut down due to injury. Again, he stayed in the league longer than you would think, but again, he had more success with Pittsburgh, as in like number 3 or 4 receiver. Should never have been drafted in the first round. It wasn't his fault. I mean, I remember ESPN, or as Raiders fans like to call them, BSPN, talking about the draft pick, and all the people in the panel were like laughing, and then they cut Darius Hayward-Bay in his house, and it's obvious that he heard all the shit they were talking about him. I mean, it was not a good moment for ESPN. I mean, Darius Hayward-Bay, I do feel for the kid. He was a good kid, but he should never have been drafted where he was drafted. Al just overdrafted him. And 3 picks later, we got the 49ers took Michael Crabtree, the wide receiver, who eventually would play for the Raiders anyway. So he should have drafted him, but again, Crabtree didn't have blazing speed. He was more of a route runner, more hands, more crafty, whereas Hayward-Bay was the blazer, so obviously Al Davis took the blazer. In the second round, we took Mike Mitchell, the safety, who was so overdrafted by Al Davis that ESPN, I think, didn't even have a film clip they could show when he was drafted, because he was expected to go in like the 5th or the 6th round, and the Raiders took him in the second round. I mean, Mike Mitchell turned into an okay box safety, but again, that was really with the Steelers. Then he played with the Panthers. He wasn't really that good for the Raiders, but then again, it speaks to the Raiders in the last 20 odd years just not being able to develop players. Now in the 4th round, we got Lewis Murphy at wide receiver. Again, another nice wide receiver who'd make some big plays every now and again. He'd kind of bounce around the league as well, and then he was out of the league. And in round 6 we get Brandon Myers, a serviceable backup tight end. But again, you're not really going into drafts and what you want to come out with is like a solid backup tight end. The 2010, this was Al Davis's last draft. So with 9 picks, again you've got an opportunity to make your team better. In the first round we took Rolando McClain, the linebacker from Alabama, who had off the field problems, and he did not last long. He was out of the NFL pretty quickly, made a comeback with the Cowboys, and probably played better with the Cowboys than he did was. But again, a bit of a knucklehead. And players that would be drafted after Rolando McClain, Brandon Graham, who had like a 12-year run with the Eagles. I think he just retired last year. Earl Thomas, who was integral in Pete Carroll's Legion of Boom at safety, and Jason Pierre-Paul, decent defensive end for a decade. We could have them, but we drafted Rolando McClain. The Raiders have never really drafted linebackers. Even if you go back to when we won Super Bowls, our linebackers were basically veterans from other teams that Al Davis would pick up, because Al Davis at one point was so good at reclamation projects. The rest of the draft in the second round, we got Lamar Houston, a defensive end, again solid player who probably had a better career with other teams. His career can be summed up with when he left in free agency. He joined the Bears and tore his ACL while celebrating a sack. In third round we get Jared Veldheer, who turned into a really good tackle. But again, Lamar Houston and Veldheer, when free agency came up, they wanted far more money than they were actually worth, so they both left. Then fourth round, Jacoby Ford at wide receiver, dynamic receiver, speedy guy. This is getting familiar. Kick returner, scored a wonderful kick return against the Chiefs. But again, within like 3 years, he was out of football. In seventh round, safety Stevie Brown, again, who was decent, was probably better when he went to Kansas City. Another player who was probably better once they left the Raiders. So again, Raider player development in the last 20 years, non-existent pretty much. And then 2011, the first draft after Al Davis had died, sadly. 8 picks. We used a pick in the supplemental draft in the third round, which pretty much nobody does anymore, and that was for quarterback Terrell Pryor, who again could run about a bit. Accuracy not great. Scored the wonderful opening 93-yard run against the Steelers, which was very enjoyable. Which we won that game bizarrely. As terrible as we've been, we've actually got a pretty good record against the Steelers during this time. First round we had no pick. I think that was part of the Carson Palmer deal that Hugh Jackson made. Second round, we picked Stefan Wisniewski. I think it was the nephew of Steve Wisniewski, who should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's not because his reputation is he was dirty, which he was, but he should still be in the Hall of Fame. Again, Stefan Wisniewski was decent. He probably had a better career with Philly when he went to them. Third round, Joe Barksdale at tackle. Again, okay tackle. I think he went somewhere else and was at least serviceable for a couple of years. The fourth round, Taiwan Jones, again another speed merchant. Never really fit in with the Raiders, but went I think to Buffalo and became a really good gunner in special teams. And in the fifth round, Denarius Moore at wide receiver, another receiver who looked really good for a season and a half and then disappeared and was out of the league. 2012 with 6 picks. This is one of the worst drafts just for returns. Again, no first round pick. In the rest of the draft, in the fourth round, we took Miles Burris. Again, another solid linebacker. I think he was derailed by injuries. He's actually got a really good YouTube channel. You should check that out. And in the fifth round, Jack Crawford at defensive end. Born in England. Again, he had a really long career for a player who, again, was just solid. He was never anything was, but then as soon as he left and went to other teams, I think he bounced around the league. But again, he had a solid little career for himself, which is kind of what you want in a 5th round pick, but again, didn't do anything for us. 2013 with 10 picks. So again, this is an opportunity to build your team, make your team better, fill in those backup spots, get 2 or 3 starters. But what did we end up with? First round we took corner, DJ Hayden. Now DJ Hayden was shot during college. He almost died on the field. No, sorry, this wasn't the person who was shot. No, he almost died in the field. He had a heart issue, almost died in the field, but we drafted him in the 1st round. And again, he turned out to be not very good, but had a solid career with other teams. He went to Jacksonville. He turned out to be an okay slot corner, but again, you're picking in the 1st round. You have to hit in your 1st round picks, and DJ Hayden was not a hit. The next pick, for example, was defensive tackle Sheldon Richardson, who was a really good defensive tackle for a number of years for the Jets. But again, I don't think 2013 was that great a draft. In the 3rd round, we get C.O. Moore at linebacker. Again, was solid for a few years. 4th round, quarterback Tyler Wilson, who never played a down. Great pick that was. Probably the best pick in our draft was in the 6th round, Latavius Murray at running back, who again had a really long career. I think he only retired either this off-season or last off-season. Again, bounced around the league, but was a good little running back. Well, it's not that little, it's about 6'2", but had a nice solid career for a 6th round pick. Also in the 6th round, we get tight end Michael Rivera, who again was a nice tight end. In the 7th round, we get Bryce Butler at receiver, who probably had a better career once he went to Dallas. And then 2014, which is easily the best draft since the Super Bowl in 2002. In the 1st round, we had 8 picks. In the 1st round, we took Khalil Mack. There's no need to have taken anybody else, but of course, once John Gruden took over for the 2nd time, he traded Mack, which was stupid. Rest of the draft, we got Derek Carr in the 2nd round, who again, probably our 4th best quarterback in history. It'd be wonderful to see what would happen if he hadn't broken his leg in 2016, because after that he was just never the same. In the 3rd round, Gabe Jackson, Pro Bowl guard. In the 4th round, Justin Jelly Ellis at defensive tackle. Again, really solid defensive tackle. In the 7th round, we get TJ Carey at corner, who probably did a better career elsewhere. And definitely in the 7th round, we took Shelby Harris at defensive end. Did nothing for us, but then had a really good career when he left, went to Denver, and I think he went somewhere else. But again, had a really good career elsewhere. 2015, we had 10 picks. So again, other opportunity. Let's stock up on players. 1st round, we took Amari Cooper, who just came back in the off-season to us and then stayed for a week and then decided to retire. And again, another player that we traded when John Gruden came in, which, yeah, we got a 1st round pick, which of course we no doubt wasted. But right after Amari Cooper, we could have got tackle Brandon Scherf, I think, who switched to guard and was, I think he made the Pro Bowl as guard for the Washington. Or we could have Leonard Williams, defensive lineman from the Jets, and he's in Seattle at the moment. Again, really good defensive lineman that we could have had. 2nd round, we had Mario Edwards, who again was fairly rubbish for us, but developed elsewhere into a solid defensive lineman. We had Clive Walford at tight end in the 3rd round. Again, solid tight end. We know how to draft tight ends. The 4th round, guard John Feliciano, who I believe just retired. But again, did nothing really for us, but went to Buffalo and San Francisco and had a really solid career as a guard, nothing special. The 5th round, Neeran Ball, the linebacker, who's dead now as well. 2016, this was the year where it actually looked like a proper team until Derek Carr broke his leg. We had 7 picks in the first round. We took Carl Joseph at safety. A small safety, never really panned out. He went elsewhere but never really panned out. Should never have drafted him. 2 picks after Carl Joseph, tackle Taylor Decker, who was in Detroit for a lot of years. In the rest of the draft, in the second round, we took Jihad Ward, a defensive end. Very much like Mario Edwards, overdrafted by us, but went on to have a solid career. Went to the Giants mainly. The 4th round, Connor Cook, another quarterback who was just awful because of the injuries to Carr and Matt McGloin as backup. Connor Cook ended up starting the playoff game and was completely overmatched, and then he was out of the league pretty quickly. Probably the best pick in the draft was in the 5th round, running back DeAndre Washington, a nice little scat back. Bizarrely, he went to Kansas City after that, but then was quickly moved on from. But he's a nice little running back. Then 2017, 9 picks, that's one of the worst ones. In the first round, corner Gary Conley, who I believe was being investigated for sexual assault, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to be wrong on that. So allegedly he was being investigated for sexual assault. He never turned into anything. He was a bust as well. And then the rest of the draft, I've put nobody. So 2017's draft of 9 picks was basically completely worthless. 3 picks after Gary and Conley, you could have had cornerback Tre'Davious White, who's still playing. Granted, he's had like ACL injuries and stuff, so he's not the player he was in 2017, but he is still playing. So 2017, the Raiders might as well not bother turning up for the draft. Complete waste of time. 2018, don't worry, there's only 7 years left. 2018 we had 9 picks. First round we took Colton Miller, a left tackle, who at the time everybody slagged us off for this. Everybody said it was a terrible pick, but Colton Miller is in the top half dozen tackles. He's probably the best left tackle in the league that nobody talks about, probably because he plays for us. Now, his rookie year, he was not good, but he was playing in one knee, so he was a bit of a turnstile at times. But he could have easily quit and just said, I'm not fit enough to play, just put me in IR for the rest of the year. But he gutted it out, and that proves a lot. Colton Miller, you could argue, well, he pretty much is our best draft picks in the last 5-6 years. He's still on the team, just got an extension. The rest of the draft, in the 3rd round, we took another tackle, Brandon Parker, who was generally awful. In the 3rd round, we took Arden Key, defensive end, who had issues in college. Again, did nothing for us, but I think he's still actually playing. Again, bounced around the league, but still in the league. In round 5, we thought we'd get a steal with Maurice Hurst, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, who again, I think possibly still playing. I think he might be a IR. He's had his injuries, but he bounced around the league and he went to Cleveland and turned into a solid defensive tackle, whereas for us he did absolutely nothing. In the 5th round, we took punter Johnny Townsend, because we know how to draft punters. And he went, I think he went to Kansas City for a period, solid punter. 2019, God, this was bad. We had 9 picks, 3 number 1 picks. 3 number 1 picks. So this should be 3 starters. 3 starters of high quality. And what did we get? Okay, the first round we get Cleland Ferrell, the defensive end from Clemson, who was not a pass rusher, He's still in the league because he's a solid defensive lineman, but really a backup defensive lineman, and that's who you're taking. It's 6 overall, I think. Either 5 or 6 overall. And the next pick, ironically, was Devin White, the linebacker. Tampa Bay took him, who was really excellent for a few years and then fell off, and we've actually signed him, and he's been okay so far in the first 3 games. That's who we should have just taken in 2019. We've took Cleveland Ferrell, who again, you kind of feel bad for the guy because he's a good kid, but he just should never have been drafted that high. There was a lot of really good defensive linemen on that Clemson line, and we picked the one that didn't pan out. Surprise, surprise. Then the second first round pick was Josh Jacobs, who has turned out to be a really good running back. We didn't pay him, and then obviously he's playing much better in Green Bay. It's Charles Woodson all over again. And then finally Jonathan Abrams, who hard-hitting safety, pretty much ruined his rookie year by hitting somebody in pre-season. Hard hitter, terrible in coverage, not a bit of a numbskull, a bit of a knucklehead. So for those 3 first round picks, Green Bay is reaping the reward for Josh Jacobs. Again, you should be getting 3 impact players with 3 first round picks. Teams would kill for 3 first round picks, and we just blew them basically. But in the second round we got Travion Mullen, a corner who looked really good when he was healthy, just never healthy. Again, probably the pick in the last 6 years that isn't in the first round. At the 4th round, Max Crosby, who of course is still dominating at defensive end. At the moment, he never gets enough sacks, but it's because he's been doubled and triple teamed. We've spent the last 3 years trying to get him a partner on the other end of the defensive line, and it never works out. At some point, he's going to ask for a trade. You could argue we maybe should have traded him for a couple of first round picks, but then, as you can see on this evidence, we would have blown them anyway. And also in the 4th round, we get Foster Moreau at tight end, really good tight end, who we let go to New Orleans. He's still playing. In the 5th round, another little gem, Hunter Renfrow at wide receiver, who caught like over 100 catches his second year, but then when Josh McDaniels came in, he wasn't really interested, and then he had an illness, and he's making a comeback in Carolina. So again, 2019, obviously we got Max Crosby out of Eastern Michigan, which is just an amazing find, but otherwise just another wasted opportunity and what ifs. And then we come to 2020. 7 picks we had. We had 2 more first round picks. Oh, tell us, Solitary Ronin, with these 2 first round picks, you must have got generational players. Well, in the first round at wide receiver, we picked Henry Ruggs because we wanted a speedster. Henry Ruggs then, 2021, he was out at night in Las Vegas after drinking quite a lot, got into his sports car, was clocked at 110 miles an hour, crashed his car into another car, and the young woman and her dog were burned alive in the crash. Henry Ruggs is now in prison. And then we got corner Damon Arnett, who was a bit of a questionable character as well. To be fair, Henry Ruggs didn't have a history of being a character problem, to be fair. It was only when he got... Damon Arnett is out of the league now because Damon Arnett was another knucklehead. He's from Ohio State, it makes sense. But we finally cut him after he put up a video on social media of him brandishing guns and acting all gangster. Well, you can act all gangster because you're now unemployed. The Chiefs picked him up for 5 minutes, I think, and he was even too toxic for the Chiefs, who have had a history of criminals and murder-suicides. So Henry Ruggs in prison, Damon Arnett will probably be in prison at some point. Great use of 2 first-round picks there. Now, just to say, after Henry Ruggs, if you're looking for a receiver, which we were, granted, we wanted to take the top off the defence kind of receiver. After Henry Ruggs, we could have had Tristan Wirfs at tackle, who's Pro Bowl or All-Pro type calibre. He's hurt at the moment, but he will be back for Tampa Bay. But if you just wanted a receiver, Jerry Jeudy, who never really came to fruition in Denver. He's kind of a number 2 receiver. But then you've got CeeDee Lamb, who is the number 1 in Dallas, probably a top 5 receiver in the league. Then Justin Jefferson, who's probably the 2nd best receiver in the league. Brandon Ayuk, who's a really good receiver for 49ers, even though he's coming off an ACL. In the 2nd round, you could have Michael Pittman, who's the Indianapolis Colts number 1 receiver, and T. Higgins, the Bengals number 2 receiver. Granted, he's got an injury history. You'd had all those receivers instead of Henry Ruggs. Now, obviously, you can't predict that he's going to get into a car drunk 110 miles an hour and kill a young woman and her dog. But then the rest of the drafts. In the 3rd round, we took another wide receiver, Lynn Bowden Jr., who was a kind of jack of all trades, a Swiss Army knife for was it West Virginia? That could be completely wrong. But he didn't even make out a training camp. We traded him to the Dolphins. So your 3rd round pick doesn't even make out a training camp. Whoever did the homework in 2020, it's funny because obviously you get all these people now who are like, fire Pete Carroll and bring back John Gruden. It's like, you do remember the drafts that John Gruden did? It's like, yeah, Mike Mayock was the GM, but John Gruden was calling the shots, especially in the 1st and 2nd round. So you want John Gruden, you want to come back to these drafts. Let's just forget John Gruden. We should have kept hold of him instead of trading him. That's what started the curse. But never go back. Never go back in relationships. Never go back. We had our chance. We should have kept him. We would have won a Super Bowl with him. But we don't want him back for the 3rd time to suffer worse drafts than these, if that's possible. 3rd round, we also took another receiver. So in the first 3 rounds, we took 3 receivers and none of them panned out. Brian Edwards, who we thought was going to be a sleeper, from South Carolina. He was a Gamecock. But again, never panned out. Went to Atlanta, never panned out. The 4th round, we got John Simpson at guard, who was this kind of solid guard. Again, I think he went elsewhere and did better. And Amik Robertson in the 4th round, who kind of took 3 years to kind of actually become a proper player and then left and went to Detroit. So 2020, another complete waste of time of a draft. But wait, there's 2021. The 1st round in 2021, that's just wonderful. The 1st round we took Alex Leatherwood at tackle in Alabama, who had like at best 2nd round grade on him, probably a 3rd or 4th round grade. We took him at 17. I think 3 picks later, the Vikings took Christian Darrisaw, who's turned into a really good offensive tackle. I mean, again, he's hurt at the moment, but he will be back this year. The 2nd round, we took Trevon Merrick, who again is a solid safety, but never really made any plays. The new regime let him walk in free agency, which was a good thing. Jacksonville signed him, but I think through 3 weeks. Oh, sorry, Carolina. Always get Carolina and Jacksonville, they're pretty much the same team. Merrick went to Carolina and he's not making plays for Carolina either. Well, to be fair, I think he made 1 play so far in 3 weeks. In the 3rd round, we took Malcolm Kuntz, who again did nothing until 2023, the back end of 2023, but then tore his ACL right before the start of 2024, and that was wiped. And he's off to a slow start this year. He'll probably never be the same again, which is a shame. So the search for a partner for Max Crosby on the other end of the line continues. In the third round, we also took Divine Diablo at linebacker, who could never stay healthy. Flashed, but again, could never stay healthy. We let him walk to Atlanta as well. He seems to be playing okay in Atlanta. He'll probably go on to be a Hall of Famer now. In the fifth round, we took Nate Hobbs. Really good slot corner, really aggressive, good tackler, but again, couldn't stay healthy. And we did what we normally do. He ends up in Green Bay. He played his first game last week, I think. But he'll probably end up in a Hall of Famer in Green Bay. That's what we tend to do. So not great in 2021. And again, these are the players that aren't on Pete Carroll's team now. You know, and that's why when I say we don't have a very good roster, it's because of the last 20 years. Obviously, players 20 years ago aren't going to be in the roster now. But you know what I mean? The drafts from 2019 to now, the majority of these players should be on the team now, but they're not. So you're starting with a pretty bare cupboard, and you're expecting Pete Carroll to come in and win 40-0 every week. It's like, that's not really going to happen. 2022, we had no first round pick because we traded for Devontae Adams, who last year we then traded to the Jets, who then traded to the Rams. And he seems to have caught a second wind with the Rams. So the rest of the draft, we didn't have a first pick until the third round. We've got Dylan Parham, who's a decent guard, but not strong at the point of attack and should really be benched at the moment. Zamir White in the fourth round. Thought this would be a good pick, wasn't. He's the backup round back to Ashton Genty, but doesn't really show much. And in the seventh round, we get Thayer Munford, who never really panned out. At tackle, just 3 left, and obviously this year's draft, you can't really make too many judgments. So the 2023 draft with 9 picks. In the first round, we took Tyree Wilson. Now, this was the Josh McDaniels regime, who acted as though they had 5 years guaranteed. So they took Tyree Wilson, who didn't have much production in college, but again, physical tools, apart from speed and pass rush moves. But apart from that, physical traits, you know, he had 2 arms and 2 legs. But they knew he had a foot problem. So they knew he wasn't going to do anything in 2023, which he didn't. But for a new regime to think, yeah, we'll take a player in the first round, but he's not going to help us his first year, just smacks of like arrogance. And you know, this isn't the Chiefs winning Super Bowls. They don't have many roster spots or whatever, and just taking somebody who's hurt, who might develop the following year or the following year. This is a team that doesn't win, need impact players, and you take a player who's got a foot problem who isn't going to do anything for you in his first year. I mean, to be fair, he hasn't done anything the second year or the third year, and he will be off the team next year. But, and of course, right after him, the Falcons took Bijan Robinson. He's one of the best running backs in the league. Jalen Carter, the defensive tackle of the Eagles, who you'll see dominating week in, week out. And the Bears tackle Darnell Wright, who's turning into a really good offensive tackle. Now, to be fair, after what happened with Henry Ruggs, you can understand why we maybe didn't draft Jalen Carter, because he was in a chasing incident with friends, and the people in the other car, like one of them were killed. So it wasn't the car that Jalen Carter was driving, but he was involved in the race that other people got killed, I believe. So you can understand why with the Henry Ruggs, why certainly ownership, because it was a different coaching staff, different GM, but maybe why ownership was maybe, let's not draft a guy who was done for speeding that involved a death after 2 years after one of our players caused the death of a young woman and a dog. But Jalen Carter's an absolute monster who would really help Max Crosby out. The rest of the draft, in the second round, we get Michael Mayer, who's a backup tight end, really good tight end, and backing up the player we would then draft at tight end the following year. In the third round is a funny story that sums up the Raiders drafting of the last 23 years. A defensive line, we took Byron Young in the third round. The Rams would also take a Byron Young, I believe, in the third round as well, who's turned into being an excellent player. And there's a rumour that the Raiders took the wrong Byron Young. They actually wanted the Byron Young that's turned out to be an excellent player, but put in the details of the other Byron Young, who is now not on the Raiders 2 years later. In the third round, we get Trey Tucker, who just scored 3 times in the loss to Washington. Geno Smith, in actual fact, hasn't thrown a touchdown pass to anybody else that isn't called Trey Tucker. He's got 4 touchdowns in 3 games. In the fourth round, we took Jacorian Bennett, who the new regime traded to Philadelphia for defensive tackle Thomas Booker, who, to be fair, that actually looks like a really good trade because Jacorian Bennett's done bugger all for the Eagles, and Booker has made some nice plays for us so far this season. He forced a fumble from Mariota against Washington. And in the fourth round, we took Aidan O'Connell out of Purdue, who is our backup quarterback and looks like a backup quarterback. Because again, we can't pick quarterbacks in the draft either. 2024, we had 8 picks. The first round, we took Brock Bowers, everybody laughed at, but then he set all records for tight ends. Maybe because we didn't really have too many receivers outside Jacoby Myers. Also, Brock Bowers probably shouldn't have played in week 2 because he hurt his knee in week 1. They should have rested him, but they didn't. So he didn't look great in week 2, and he didn't really look great yesterday either. And then the rest of the draft, the second round, we get Jackson Powers Johnson. Answers in a postcard, what the hell is going on with JPJ? He was at centre last year. Eventually they moved him to centre where he should be. He opened up centre in the off-season, but then the new regimes put him at guard where he struggled. He got a concussion, he didn't play week 2. He was active for week 3, but was only on special teams while they play Meredith at centre and Kappa at guard. And they're awful. The interior 3, the offensive line, is just terrible. And also in the third round, they get DJ Glaze, who's turned out a solid right tackle. The jury's still out because it was only last year. And then this year's draft, again, you can't really judge it, but we had 11 picks. One of them didn't make it out of training camp. But we took Ashton Jeanty in the first round. Everybody's already saying he's a bust, but he's not getting blocking. You could argue, well, take an offensive lineman first, which is valid, but Jeanty will be alright, hopefully. But the rest of the draft, in the second round, we took receiver Jack Besh, who is kind of a slot guy. He hasn't made it really onto the field yet. I think he's got 1 catch in 3 weeks, but that's fair enough, you know. But again, bit of a strange pick, that one. Darian Porter, the corner, in the third round. I think by the end of the season he'll probably be starting. He's a lengthy, long corner, the way Pete Carroll likes them. And then 2 offensive linemen, Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant in the third round, who we should probably just throw in and see what happens. I mean, they can't be any worse than the interior 3 at the moment. And then in the fourth round, we took Deontay Thornton. Tall guy, fast guy, okay hands, not a great route tree, but again, he's starting at the moment just because we don't have anybody else. But I'm sure by the second half of the season we'll develop. So that's one of the reasons why the Raiders suck and will continue to suck until can actually draft players that help you. It's a fairly basic concept. Let's draft players that can help the team instead of players that we get rid of after 2 years and then they go on to have a much better career somewhere else because they actually develop and coach properly. So it's like Al Davis died and his son took over, Mark Davis, with different coaches, different GMs, and the results are strangely familiar. And this is because of the curse of trading away John Gruden. I don't know when it'll end. I really have no answers of when it'll end. Because let's be honest, taking on Pete Carroll as head coach, proven winner, he's won a Super Bowl, should have won 2. What's the best case scenario for Pete Carroll? We get 3 years with him. He's 74 now. 2 years is probably more realistic. And again, with this dearth of talent, what's he going to do in 2 years? Maybe next year we win 7 or 8 games. But to set that table, to build your foundation for the next coach, you're going to have to keep that hire in-house. Because if you bring in a new coach, unless obviously we keep Spytek as the general manager, the coach understands Spytek's going to get you the players, a new coach, but it's going to have to be similar scheme, because otherwise you get a new GM and coach likes different style of player, so you have to move over and get a different type of player that you want, which is constant churning, constant changing. You know, Pete Carroll is not here for 10 years. Unless he turns into Marv Levy. So what is the best case scenario? You know, until Mahomes and Herbert leaves the division, you're always going to be not the best quarterback. Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, yes, I'm Scottish, so I'm going to be pessimistic, or realistic, as the word means. You know, when's it going to end? You know, again, because we used to be quite good, I think that's what makes it worse for Raider fans. It's different if you're fans of teams who've never won a Super Bowl, you know, don't have the legacy, but that's the problem. All our good stuff is in the past. You know, Al Davis used to say the greatness of the Raiders is in its future. It's not, it's in its past. No team has the right to be good. You've got to work at it and develop it and draft properly. But it's really frustrating when you get first year GMs, first year head coaches, and they come in and win 10 games. But what you usually find when that happens, there's a foundation from the last regime. There's a solid group of good players. Or, you know, take Washington for example. Last year, you know, Dan Quinn's been around the block, defensive coordinator, and then took the Falcons to the Super Bowl. Should have won that Super Bowl. So he knows what he's doing. And then they get Jaden Daniels. And if you get a quarterback, yes, allegedly Antonio Pierce wanted to trade up for Jaden Daniels, and the GM said no. And the coach, and yeah, that's a different story. Sometimes getting the right quarterback can make all the difference. It can cover up all the cracks. But the problem the Raiders have is, with a few exceptions, you know, a couple of years ago, we were probably going to take Michael Penix, but of course the Falcons shocked everybody and took Penix. So we were like the 6th team for 5 quarterbacks. Generally, we're never bad enough to be like in the top 2 picks, but then we're never good enough to actually make the playoffs. So we're in this limbo of picking from 6 to 15, and unless you consistently hit on those picks, it's not going to change. Now, of course, Chip Kelly could start actually calling an aggressive attacking game while reining Gino in from his gunslinger mentality sometimes. Ashton Genty could finally get some blocks. We could get some leads and let Max Crosby actually cook, as the phrase is by the youngsters. But let's be honest, it's pretty unlikely. We're going to win 4 or 5 games, maybe 6. Everybody's going to want Pete Carroll fired. We're going to come back next year, we're going to win 7 games, and then Pete Carroll's going to retire, hand the reins over to Chip Kelly if he'll last that long, or Patrick Graham if he'll last that long. And then who knows what will happen. Maybe Mahomes will hit the skids, Bo Nix will flame out, Justin Herbert's arm will fall off. Yeah, who knows. It's just after yesterday's performance of the team just not turning up in all 3 phases, I just kind of had to draw the line and just make this video. Unfortunately, I will make another video, I think, on our free agency, because that's another reason why the Raiders have sucked since 2003, because our free agency has been atrocious as well. Just to add to the draft being atrocious, why be only atrocious at one thing? As I say, bad organisations continue to make bad decisions, and that's what we've done, and that's why we're here. That's why we all want to jump off a bridge on a Monday morning or Sunday night, whichever suits you. So again, apologies to the people who watch my film videos. But as I said, nobody's going to watch this anyway. But that's why the Raiders suck. The draft edition. So thanks for watching if you've made it this far, and if you haven't, thanks for not watching. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films. Looking forward to getting beaten by Caleb Williams, where we'll make him look like John Elway, or maybe even worse, the backup will play, because Tyson Bagent beat us last year and absolutely destroyed us. Here's to 4 or 5 more wins this year, and another draft where we think we'll get good players but we'll end up not getting good players. Farewell.